everybody. Does everybody hear me okay? And does everybody see me okay? I don't know, I don't see anybody there, but I just want to make sure that everybody can see me okay. And we will begin our webinar tonight. Looks like everybody's okay. So I see a lot of yeses that everybody hears me okay, so that's good. Those of you who don't know me, last time I introduced myself, but we'll go ahead and I'll give you a brief introduction again and what we're going to do tonight. My name is Mr. Courtney Zietzk. I am a teacher from the Oregon coast, but I also spent quite a long time out in Asia. I spent 11 years on Saipan, which is not very far from where you're at in China. And I taught AP US history, world history, international IB history. I'm certified in 5 states in the United States as well as internationally. In Saipan, I hold a Master's of Education degree, and I've been teaching history for about 15 years. I've been to 56 countries on six continents now. So I know a little bit about what I'm talking about. I enjoy very much what I do, and my students have done very, very well on my history classes, and they've learned a lot. So we are going to be looking at today, we're going to be looking at number 2 in the series of this webinar. This is about World War II and how it started and the rise and the fall of the German Third Reich led by Adolf Hitler. The first one we did, the first webinar, we talked a little bit about World War I, its ending, and about why and how Hitler would have come to power. Just a brief introduction on that. But mainly we talked about the Treaty of Versailles at the conclusion of World War I and the damage that it did to Europe, but also the how unfair it was to Germany, to the German people. And this was one of the main platforms that Adolf Hitler would use to come to power, specifically citing the Treaty of Versailles and how unfair it was to the German people as well as the German leadership, to where the German people were made to suffer terribly with regards to this Treaty of Versailles. A couple of things also we talked about. We talked about the issue of the Roaring '20s in the United States, about how everything was good after World War I. And then we would slip into the Great Depression, which would happen in October of 1929, which was especially hard on Germany. Germany was already hurting because of the war reparations as well as the bad economy. And now they were hurt even worse with the Great Depression beginning in the United States, and then subsequently the banking collapse that would happen, which would further damage Germany's financial reputation as well as their economy. So things were looking very bleak, but things were also looking bleak for everybody during this period of time. The United States would elect a new president. It was Herbert Hoover, and then we would elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt as president of the United States in 1932. He would come to power in 1933, January, and incidentally, that was the same year that Adolf Hitler would become Chancellor of Germany. And we're going to go through this today about how he became Chancellor of Germany and then his meteoric rise to essentially the dictatorship of Germany with the German Third Reich Nazi as his vehicle, which would carry him up to the most powerful man in Germany, what is known as the Führer. So let us begin. I just wanted to kind of bring you up to date a little bit about everything. So let's begin, and let's talk about this thing we call Hitler's rise to power. Okay, I hope everybody can see that. That's as big as I could get this thing, so hopefully you'll be able to see this okay. So the rise of the Nazi defies any simple narrative. It came out of a myriad of interlacing events, ideologies, as well as historical accidents. So let's begin this presentation. Kind of an analogy here. Okay, this basically is an economy and anti-Semitism and German nationalism. Nazi propaganda was the wind on the fire of the Holocaust, which would eventually, we're going to be talking about that. And Adolf Hitler, nice little analogy here about a match who would kindle this not very nice part of world history. In fact, the Holocaust, what would we end up with, was probably one of the most least human events of all of human history with regards to its insanely cruel treatment of the Jewish people. We're going to go looking at that, but this was culminating over a long period of time. So if we look at the graphic here, lighting the match, it basically says that some scholars believe that the Holocaust was masterminded by Adolf Hitler and was the result of long-term planning on his part. This opinion has often been criticized for focusing too much on Hitler and letting everyone else off the hook. This wasn't just one person directing this. A nation has to be led, but a nation has to be willing to do for this to happen. So this was not just Adolf Hitler's idea. It was a culmination of many people's anger toward not only the Jewish people, but the extreme resentment of other parts of Europe that happened after World War I and even before that. So a combination of these two viewpoints seems more in line. It was actually a combination of many people, many ideologies, and what the German people expected and what they wanted at this time. Adolf Hitler was an essential factor of the Nazism. It most certainly was. In the genocide and produced was without question. Without Hitler, Nazism, World War II, and the Holocaust would have taken a very different form, but it would have happened eventually if they would have occurred at all, which many scholars do believe that it would definitely have happened. Maybe not as quite as angry and the perversion that Adolf Hitler had steered it into, but most people believe that World War II would have happened regardless if Hitler was in power or not. Hitler did not have complete power. Many of the power that he had, it was basically subordinated to his people, Himmler and a bunch of other ones that would actually carry out the orders, but it was a culmination of a lot of different people working in concert. Dictators depend on popular support, which is the narrative at the time. Mussolini in Italy would not have come to power if he certainly wasn't helped along the way and would have been cooperated with. Okay, so if one were to think of the Holocaust as a raging fire, certain essential components or kindling would have been necessary to create this fire. And some of these were the existing anti-Semitism in Europe and particularly in Germany. Hitler and the Nazis did not invent anti-Semitism. They simply reflected and built on prejudices that were familiar with parts of many of Europe who were thinking the same thing. A substantial part of the population had to be ready to consider it desirable and acceptable if they were going to accept it. And that certain other people would have been isolated, persecuted, and killed as a result of these people's beliefs. Remember what happened after World War I. Germany suffered as much as anybody else during this conflict. They were angry because their people were killed during World War I, but they were especially angry about that they were made to be blamed for everything and had to pay for everything. As a result of World War I, for quite a long time, the German people were made to suffer. In fact, the whole world, including Europe, turned their back on them and let them basically said, look, we don't really care. If you look at the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, it was pretty basically bad for German people. So there was an axe to grind here. Okay, the existing, the downturn of the German economy, as we've discussed, although the Weimar Republic was not fully endorsed by the populace, without the downturn of the German economy, the Nazis would have never gained the power. This is what's so important about this period of time. The Great Depression was only fuel on the fire. When that Great Depression happened, Germany was laid to suffer much worse. Okay, the massive inflation, unemployment, exasperated by the Great Depression, sent the public into a panic and searching for a quick fix. Hitler was that quick fix. he promised the German people that if you follow us, and if you follow what we're going to do, I am going to make Germany a way better country, and I'm going to create massive employment, put food on your tables, and most of all, I'm going to make Germany proud of herself again. When people had no hope and no place else to turn, but they could see that the Nazi army was there and making progress, they clamped onto that because that's what gave the German people hope. Even though many people thought it was wrong, it's always better to cling to hope and a possibility of a better future than to have nothing at all. Okay, so desire for a renewed German nationalism was there. After the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was searching for a strong leader who would reform the country, make the country a better place for their people, and turn up their economy and make life better for the German people. In order for that kindling to ignite, or all the stuff that was there, Hitler was at the right place at the right time and saying the right thing to the German people, which enabled him to become Chancellor of Germany. And only 52 days later, he would become, for all intents and purposes, a dictator. Okay, let's continue. Okay, Adolf Hitler, the Austrian citizen, he was a high school dropout. He was a lance corporal in the German army. Interesting how somebody with a low military rank and a high school dropout would become dictator of Germany and the most powerful person in Germany later, which would also include Austria and even Czechoslovakia. So it's interesting about how he came to power. What did he do that would make him such a powerful leader and so revered all over Germany? Amazing. So we're going to get to this a little bit. A high school dropout from Austria, who never graduated, who never rose above the rank of lance corporal, become dictator of Germany and also ultimately the most powerful person on the European continent, because clearly he was. Let's figure this out. Okay, myth or fact, Adolf Hitler was elected to power, and Hitler's rise to power was inevitable. Let's take a look at these. Okay, so Hitler's rise to power, birth of the Nazi Party, the world is too dangerous to live in, not because of the people who do evil, but because of the people who let it happen. And this is something that's been kind of discussed many, many times about people have to let this stuff happen. In this case, they did. Okay, birth of the Nazi Party, the Weimar Republic, beer hall, November 8th and 9th, 1923. Hitler actually tried to take over Germany to incite a riot. His followers were shot. Hitler would later become a prisoner in jail. He actually went to jail. But then the Nazis would become a legitimate party. Hitler would be appointed chancellor in 1933. The Reichstag fire on February 27th, which basically eliminated all of his competition. The emergency decree on February 28th, 1933, and the Enabling Act of March 23rd, Night of the Long Knives, 1934, and Hitler becomes the Fuhrer on August 2nd, 1934. That was his rise to power. Interestingly enough, Albert Einstein, who was probably one of the most smartest people we've ever known on planet Earth, said that the world is too dangerous to live in, not because of the people who do evil, but because of the people who let it happen. Einstein knew very clearly that it wasn't just Adolf Hitler, it was the people around him and the people he was leading that let it happen. And no, in certain terms, did this become more painfully aware until we were looking at the Holocaust itself. It was in full cooperation of the Nazi Party, which was the German people. Okay. Birth of the Nazi Party in 1919. Let's go back a little bit and let's bring you up to speed on what we just learned. In 1919, Hitler joined the fledgling German Workers' Party. In 1920, he took control of the group and changed the name to the German National Socialist Party or Workers' Party. Okay, this was something very interesting because this was really kind of a little nuanced thing about a very little name change, but the names would be a little bit different, kind of subtle in how they did this. Okay, so the National German Socialist Worker Parties, or Nazi for short. It was there that Hitler discovered two remarkable talents. He knew how to speak, and he had an inspired personal loyalty. People liked what he was saying, having to say. And if one would ever have to look at Hitler, and people would have to you have to understand what he was talking about, that he had a personal, very powerful charisma. The people were mesmerized of what he was telling them. He knew exactly what to say to get people to join his party. And he was very talented. He was a very, very talented public speaker. Many people are aware of that. After World War II, Hitler stayed in the army, which was now mainly engaged in suppressing various political uprisings that were breaking out across Germany. In September 1919, Corporal Hitler at that point was ordered to investigate a small, potentially dangerous group in Munich. This was the German Workers' Party, in which this was a disorganized party. Hitler saw an opportunity to rise to power. Its members expressed a right-wing doctrine consistent with his own. At the age of 30, Hitler joined with a member number of 555. He would later become the 7th member of the Executive Committee of Party, which represents completeness in Judeo-Christian theology. This is interesting because religion would always come into this. In fact, I have actual personal documents from Adolf Hitler that was been reprinted through the German Democratic Republic Party in Munich. Interesting, and I've got them emailed to me by the U.S. State Department. These documents were classified for a number of years, and I have a copy of what he was saying in his diary. Very interesting. It was here that Adolf Hitler discovered that he had two remarkable talents: public oratory and inspiring personal loyalty. His pounding fist, burning eyes, cries, and hysterics aroused the audience to a feverish pitch. In 1920, Hitler took control of the group and changed the name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi for short. He hoped that the word national would attract nationalists who wanted to rebuild Germany, who wanted the word socialist to be able to attract additional socialist people, which would improve the lives of the German working people. Very interesting, because everybody wants their lives to be improved. He just simply wanted to do it in a little bit different way. At that point, there was approximately 3,000 members. This would grow exponentially as the German economy would worsen. In 1922, Mayor Joseph Hell, a German journalist, had the occasion to interview Adolf Hitler, and he wrote about the experience in his memoirs. Toward the end of the interview, the major asked Hitler, "What do you want to do with the Jews once you have full discretionary powers?" Hitler abruptly changed his demeanor, raising his voice and carrying on as if it were dressed at an outdoor rally. And this is what he said, and this is very important. "Once I am in power, my first and foremost task will be the annihilation of the Jews. As soon as I have the power, I will do so. So I will have gallows built in rows in Munich, for example, as many as traffic allows. Then the Jews will be hanged indiscriminately and will remain hanging until they smell bad." This is terrible. "They will hang there for as long as the principles of hygiene permit. The next batch will be hung there as well until all the Jews have been exterminated." This is what he said in 1922, which begs the question that I asked my students in AP US or AP World History: why did the people of Germany allow this man to do this when they knew full well that if he was going to come into power, that would happen. So you can't blame Hitler for everything. You can blame him for inciting what he was doing, but you certainly couldn't blame it all on him because it had to have the cooperation of the German people. Now, this is what he wanted to do with the Jews. But at this point, nobody really knew exactly that he was going to start World War II. This would come later. Because if the German people would have known that he was going to start World War II, they would have never allowed him to become Chancellor of Germany. But that would come later. Once he had the power, it simply couldn't be taken away from him, simply because he had the German Nazi Party that was already there around him, protecting him, and carrying out his orders. And it wasn't just the Nazi Party; it was the German people. Hitler's rise to power. Okay, we just did this a little bit before. Okay, so here's basically the number of Reichstag deputies elected. This is very interesting. Let's read this and let's figure this out. Okay, here's the election chart at January 1919. The elections of January 1919, 76% of the Germans voted for three parties that favored democracy. These parties formed a coalition: the Social Democratic Party, the Catholic Center Party, and the German Democratic Party. Upper middle class Protestant people and remained the largest target until 1932. All of them wanted to be prosperous. Everybody understood very clearly that we have to work on the economics if we're going to make this thing happen. In February, the elected officials met in the city of Weimar, Germany, to draw up a constitution, and the Weimar Republic was formed. Remember, this was well after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. And many Germans hated the new democracy from the start. A new republic found itself attacked from both the left and the right-wing politicians. On the left, the communists hated the new government. They didn't want a democracy. They wanted a dictatorship of the workers, which would bring in the communist revolution. In January 1919, an extreme group of communists called the Spartakists had rebelled. That were many more communist uprisings in the next few years. This is what they were having to contend with in Germany. The right-wing politicians hated the Weimar government even more. The main problem was that German army had not actually surrendered. The German government had. So many people were still angry about that because Germany felt that they were going to win this war if they were given more time. They would be proven wrong on many occasions because the Americans would have annihilated the Germans in World War I if they would not have surrendered. The Germans were pretty much done, but this was out of foolish German pride that they would make this statement. So we're going to get a little bit more into that. Consequently, many had refused to believe that they had actually lost the power. They called the politicians who had signed the armistice the November criminals. These were basically internal problems with the German army, the German politicians, and the German people. Right-wing groups assassinated politicians that had set up parliamentary groups which terrorized their neighborhoods. When the government tried to bring any of them to court, right-wing judges let them all off. So we're basically looking at widespread political corruption as well. This is what Germany was dealing with. All of these different factions fighting each other, killing each other, not getting anything done. So what did Hitler do? He united the country. First thing you do when you get power, you unite country. For those of you who are going to be generals someday or get into the theater of war, the first thing that you do in conquering your enemy is you divide them. Hitler was smart enough to realize that if he's going to come to power, he has to be a uniter, not a divider. Okay, so the Weimar Republic. Okay, so this is basically what it's all at, and this is very important because this is a clear case. There it is. This is a clear case of not knowing what one hand's going to do. The Weimar Republic, now that we have a public, the problem is that we have no Republicans. first foreign minister of the Weimar Republic. President, publicly elected for a 7-year term. Head of the armed forces, power to dismiss the government and to call for new elections. Could rule independently of Reichstag in case of a national emergency. The chancellor was appointed by the president, usually the leader of the largest party in the Reichstag. And of course, Reichstag, unlimited number of political parties. So what did Hitler do when he became chancellor? First thing he did was he eliminated the Reichstag, and now he became president, Führer of Germany. He simply eliminated his people who were going to be over him. There can be only one Führer, and it's what German people call the Heiland. There is no plural for Heiland. There can be only one. And once Hitler would eventually ascend to the power of the chancellorship, it was only 52 days when he would eliminate the president or all of his adversaries, and he would become the Führer. So how did he do it? So let's figure this out. Under Article 22 of the Weimar Construction, political parties gained seats in the Reichstag in proportion to the percentage of the votes they received in the national elections. Okay, that sounds pretty basic. Under the Weimar Constitution, the president served as head of the state in Germany's dealing with other countries, while the chancellor was appointed by the president, ran the government to the day-to-day basis. So how was this different from the American system? Well, one can see pretty clearly that this is different. If you wanted to compare and contrast, our president of the United States is only elected for 4 years. He has a Congress and he's got a Supreme Court, which interprets the laws of the Constitution, where he's the head of the executive branch. It's quite a bit different. Okay, so the Weimar government refers to the German government that was formed at the Weimar, a town in the eastern part of the country in 1919. After Germany's defeat in World War I, during its 14 short years, the Republic would see 20 different governments in control. It was in disarray. Nobody really knew what they were doing. So the people at this point realized that if we're going to go somewhere in life and we want to do these things, we have to have a unifying leader. And this is what Hitler was trying to do. He saw all the Weimar Republic and all the stuff that was happening, but it wasn't getting anywhere. The people were still suffering. The people were still out of work, and the people didn't have any confidence in their government. But right here, there was 20 different governments in control. That's not a good government. Okay, so let's continue to go through this thing, because this is a very important part. Okay, the Weimar Constitution, Article 48. The Reich president may, if the public safety and order in the German Reich are considerably disturbed or endangered, take such measures as are necessary to restore public safety and order. If necessary, he may intervene with the help of the armed forces. For this purpose, he may suspend, either partially or wholly, the fundamental rights and personal freedom of people, and from the sanctity of their home, which basically means that he can arrest them, he can search them, and he can throw them on jail if he sees that they are a threat to the national government. Now, in the United States of America, we have this thing called a U.S. Constitution. And the United States Constitution basically says that there shall be no illegal search and seizure of anybody at any time under any circumstances. So that's a big difference between the American Constitution's Bill of Rights and the Weimar Constitution, Article 48. Interesting stuff. Okay, so here's the parties of the Reichstag. I'm not going to get into this too much because there's a lot of stuff there, but what I am going to do is that I am going to send you this PowerPoint, because this is going to be the next webinar's material as well. What's important to understand, if you take a look at the parties of the Reichstag, of how many parties there are, these are national parties. You don't have to be a history major or an expert in world history to figure out that this is going to create a problem. It's very simple. Too many parties governing too many people. And as a result, there was not a unifying force in Germany after World War I because of these. Everybody was vying for power, and they simply weren't going to get it. We need a Highland or a single party that was going to rule for the people of Germany, rule by the people of Germany and for the people. This is what they originally wanted, but it wasn't so much by the people, it would be Adolf Hitler. But this is very interesting because this is what would lead, unfortunately, the people of Germany to utter destruction within the Nazi party. We're going to get into that. But it's important, though. Today's lesson is, how did Hitler come to power? And most importantly, what did he do when he became in power? Okay. So this is some of the stuff that was happening in Germany now. This is amazing. Take a look at what happened to the German economy. In 1919, 4.2 marks would equal $1 US. This is all a comparison. Look at what happened in 4 years. The German mark would be 4.2 billion marks to the American dollar. So what does that tell you, class? If you are an economist or simply a history student, what does this tell you about what happened to the German economy? From 4.2 to 4.2 billion German marks to the US dollars. Well, think about that for a second and think about what must have happened to the German economy. The economy was, well, it was in incredibly bad condition. Their inflation was more than super hyperinflation. It was absolutely unbelievably terrible, which means that the German money meant absolutely nothing. Okay, so if you were living in Berlin, Germany, you saw your money go from not worth very much to worth literally nothing. Okay, you'd have to have a wheelbarrow full of money to buy a loaf of bread at the grocery store. So you simply, it could not work. Okay, and they realized this, that hey, we got to do something now. When you're starving to death, and when you don't have any food anyway, even available for sale, the economy needs to happen drastically. And that's exactly what Germany did. They had to take drastic measures to feed their people. Okay, so German children with stacks of inflated currency, virtually worthless in 1923. A woman burns the German marks so she could heat her home. Okay, this is how bad it was. They're taking money. How would you like, class, to burn your money, to burn your mom and dad's money so you could heat your home during the winter? This is how bad it was. Money was absolutely worthless. And as a result of that, people began to starve. Okay, wartime leaders attacked the Republic. Paul von Hindenburg, October 2nd, 1947, he lived until 1934. He served the German army until 1918. Erich Ludendorff, April of 65, served the German army again until 1918, incidentally the end of the war. The Weimar Republic also faced attack from its wartime leaders. These two gentlemen were the head of the German army. And most notably, Field Marshals Erich von Ludendorff and Paul von Hindenburg both vocalized their belief that the civilian government had taken power in the final days of the war and had betrayed the armed forces by surrendering. This train of thought appealed to many Germans who could not believe that their great army was on the verge of collapse on November 1918. In fact, both of these military commanders had pressed for a quick end to the war because of the sinking morale of their troops. Unfortunately for them, the United States had intervened and changed everybody's mind. But the fact is that there were still some very angry military people out there who didn't like what the civilian government had done. Because look what they were handed. Look what they were handed in the Treaty of Versailles. They were handed a document that blamed them and made them pay for everything that they simply couldn't do. Okay? Hitler would look at this and say, look, even your army's mad at you. Look at what you did to the army. Again, because Hitler's German Nazi party was based upon a military philosophy, or a military martial philosophy of government control through military force. This made his ascension to power even more attractive because of all the people that were still loyal to the military. When they saw Adolf Hitler have a militaristic attitude about how he wanted to run things in Germany, using the military under the Nazi party, and he would eventually establish the Gestapo as an internal police force, this appealed to a lot of military inclined people in Germany who felt very unhappy and betrayed by a German civilian government. So again, Hitler was saying the right thing at the right time in order for his ascension of power. He not only had the support of the people who needed jobs and opportunities, who were starving, but now he had military people who were also supporting him. Okay, so problems faced by the Weimar government from 1919 to 1923. It was basically an ineffective constitution, simply because there were so many different governments trying to do too many things at once. Left-wing communist rebellions, right-wing terrorism on the other side, and we had an invasion. 1923, Germany failed to make reparation payments, and France invaded the ruler of the Western German industrial part of the country, and inflation. France actually invaded Western industrial part of Germany because they couldn't pay the reparations. So again, this is what infuriated Hitler even worse, and the German people. Okay. Is everybody okay so far? Can I get a thumbs up or a yes? I'm going through this a little quickly, so if I'm going too fast, please tell me. I will slow down and let you digest a little bit things, but I am going to send you this PowerPoint and we will go over it. So I hope I'm not going too fast for everybody. We're just a little bit over halfway through this. I'm going to stop talking in about 20 minutes to let questions be asked and to kind of, have a regular class. But this is a lot of important information about why Adolf Hitler would come to power. Because many history students ask the same questions. How did a man so terrible as Hitler come to power in the first place? Didn't people know what was going to happen? Sadly enough, I think a lot of people did know. They could see very clearly, based upon that interview he had on the radio, that his intention was quite clear. He was going to annihilate the Jews. People heard that, but people cared about more than putting food on the table than the eventual death of would be over 6 million Jews. But he would kill much more than just the Jewish people. He would kill many of his own people. Those people who were not, quote, Aryan, blue-eyed master race, who were not pure Aryan German, if they had any additional problems with that, he would execute them as well. In fact, he executed and sterilized people who were not physically or mentally perfect. Okay, this is not very good. People who were sick, people who had some form of deformities, were also either sterilized or put to death under the German Third Reich. Pretty terrible. He killed 6 million people that could have helped him in World War II. So anyway, we'll talk about that when we get into it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Hitler's rise to power. Okay, now we're talking about the beer hall in November of 1923. We're going through each one of these. This is very interesting. Okay, part of the photo card collection used by the Nazis to indoctrinate German children was the beer hall Munich scene of the failed Nazi revolution at that point. It symbolized the birth pangs of Nazi power. The people that were killed during this little beer hall march, Hitler's followers, the blood-stained swastikas were held up in marches declaring that these people were called martyrs. Now, I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to ask you a question. Does anybody know what a martyr is? Anybody say yes to this? Anybody know? Anybody know what a martyr is? Okay, I know the teachers at the Ivy, I'm sure they know what it is explicitly, but a martyr is somebody, class, that essentially what a martyr is somebody that cares for or does something more important to a cause greater than their own life. For instance, if you sacrifice yourself to save people and you die in the process, that is called a martyr. Putting somebody's needs or a country's needs or a philosophy ahead of your own life, that means you are a martyr. You're willing to die for a cause greater than your own life. Okay, that's what a martyr is. And in many cultures, that's considered to be a hero. So what Hitler did here was he made these people heroes, that they died for a cause. They died for your Germany, people. Okay, kind of a propaganda twist for sure. By the way, class, do you know what propaganda is? Because we are going to look at propaganda because it was a major contributory force helping Hitler come into power. And it was very, very prominent in the Nazi Party during this period of time. Okay. Nazis become a legitimate party. Yes, they did. The more and more power they got with the Nazis and the armies and all the stuff that they were doing, you could see very clearly that they were a party to be reckoned with. I hope, in fact, I'm going to recommend a excellent video to watch. It's called The Rise and the Fall of the Third Reich. It is an absolutely outstanding video about the rise and fall of Adolf Hitler and his Third Reich. I hope they would have it available in China. It is a world history item, and I think it should be seen by all students everywhere. Not just simply because of what the Nazis did, but of what we as a civilization can learn from this and hopefully never repeat it, because that's very important. As we say in history as a teacher, it's very clear that history does and often repeat itself. What's happening and what I'm talking about, class, could never be repeated. People like Adolf Hitler should never come to power like this ever again, because so many people had died. Not only did he kill people all over Europe and cause the death and extermination of the Jewish people, but he led his people down a path that would utterly destroy Germany. Millions of his own people who were loyal to him would die. And this, when we get into this, I will show you pictures of Berlin in 1936. They were putting on the World Olympics, and Berlin was the absolute envy of the world. If Hitler would have stopped right there and not kill anybody and not start World War II, Hitler would go down as probably being one of the most influential, if not, and a great leader. Because at that point, he didn't kill anybody, but that would come, that would come. Hey, we got worldwide depression, as we talked about before. This was especially terrible in Germany. All seemed on the road to recovery for Germany. They were making some progress, but then all of a sudden, Wall Street crashed in the United States, which led to a cascading bank failure in the United States, and the Great Depression was on. And this was particularly bad. And there's why for Germany. Germany had taken out huge loans from the US in order to pay war reparations for their cause in World War I. Suddenly the banks had to call their loans, and the Germans were worse off than before. When the Great Depression happened, the Germans couldn't pay their loan back to the United States. Now what do we do? The crisis of the Great Depression created the instability that Hitler would have needed. He would provide the stability that Germany longed for. So let me read this to you again, you guys, and this is very important. The crisis of the Great Depression created the instability that Hitler needed. This is what would help Hitler. It wouldn't hurt him. If it hurt Germany, it would help Hitler, because now they needed him more than ever before. And people, you got to understand that. A lot of people don't. You think that the Great Depression would have hurt Hitler's chances of becoming a leader, when in fact it helped him, because now Germany is unstable. We need somebody to lead this country out of this problem. Who do we got? Adolf Hitler. Okay. He would provide the stability that Germany longed for. Unlike the beer hall, where the Nazis tried to take power by force, power would be achieved by legal means at this time. It went from bad to much worse. Hitler was the guy at the right place at the right time. Extremely nationalistic. Guys, I can help you. I will help you. This is what I'm going to do. We're a German people. We're better than this. Put me in power and I'll make your life better. And it's interestingly enough, for the first 5 years, that's exactly what he did. He made German people, their lives a lot better. It's what they called the German miracle of the early 1930s. Okay, so here's what happened. Look at this, you guys. This is very, very, very big. September 1928, 650,000 people were unemployed. 1929, it jumped up to 1.3 million. 1930, 3 million. 1931, 4.3. September 1932, 5.1 million people were unemployed. And January of 1933, 6.1 million people. Now, take a look at this graph, class, and this is very important. See this right here? It peaked in 1933. Look what happened after Hitler became chancellor. It went all the way down to practically nothing. So, when you have a leader like Adolf Hitler putting millions of people back to work, now they've got their economy started again. People were starting to believe what he was doing was right. At that point, Hitler would begin almost immediately to rebuild his army and his armed forces and his military. First priority, let's make Germany strong and let's rebuild not only the German economy and its military, but we have to rebuild the German people. And this is what he talked about through this strong nationalism, through this intense, mesmerizing speeches that he would do. And people just simply said, yeah, this is what we want to do. We want to make this country a better place for our people. Okay, so let's continue. And I'm almost done here for tonight. The Nazi Party political unknowns promised the German people a solution to their hunger and poverty. Okay, so this is very important. Okay, after the Nazis came to power, public works programs similar to those initiated by the New Deal in the United States stimulated the German economy. Prior to World War II, the average Germans credited the Nazis with their improved standard of living. Absolutely. We just showed you in the previous slide, over 6 million people would go to work. In fact, it was quite a bit more than that. It was actually closer to 10 million people because of the new public works projects that were being initiated. In fact, it's actually rumored that many of the public works projects that were initiated by Franklin D. Roosevelt were actually modeled after what Hitler was doing in Germany. They didn't like each other, but they actually were learning from what each other was doing. So this was very, very important because Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal pretty much was the same thing of what Hitler was doing in his own country, Germany. Putting people back to work. That's what stimulates an economy. Class, when you go out someday and you start making money, what are you going to do with your money? You're going to spend it. And when you spend it because you like nice things and you like good food and clothing and cars and toys and everything else, well, that stimulates the economy. So this is exactly what they realized. If we're going to make the economy better, we have to create employment. Okay. Okay, let's continue. I've got about 5 more minutes. Okay. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into the chancellors of the republic, but I am going to tell you about this. And this will be my last one for the evening, I believe. I think I'm running out of time. Hitler runs for president in 1932. In 1932, Hitler becomes a nationalized German citizen. This was interesting because Hitler was actually from Austria. In March 1932, Hitler 30%, Hindenburg 49%. But then all of a sudden they had a runoff and Hitler would lose the presidency. But at this point, the Nazi Party and Hitler would become too powerful to ignore. People were now demanding that Hitler be chancellor or something in power in Germany. So he couldn't be stopped because people realized that Hitler was now a very powerful speaker and leader, and they wanted somebody who was going to help them. Interestingly enough, okay, in order to run for president, Hitler would not become a naturalized citizen of Germany in 1932. In March of 1932, Hitler made his first attempt to run for the president of Germany. It was thought that Hitler would be stopped by re-electing President Hindenburg. However, Chancellor Brüning persuaded Hindenburg to run for re-election against Hitler. Hindenburg would have been 92 at the end of another 7-year term. He ran simply to prevent Hitler from taking over. The Social Democrats and Democrats supported Hindenburg even as a lesser evil. A vote for Hindenburg was simply a vote against Hitler. No one received the majority in the March 13th election, and a runoff was required, which Hindenburg would regain. This is where it gets interesting. Hitler's strong showing as a presidential race was a reflection of the National Socialist Party and what they were beginning to do. People started to realize that, and now they've got a problem. They can't split the country up politically. So what happens next? This is what happened. The intrigue begins. It's what they call a Schleicher-Hitler agreement. Due to the growing Nazi violence and power, Chancellor Heinrich Brüning invokes Article 48 and bans the SA and SS. In May 8th, 1932, General Kurt von Schleicher, wanting to lead Germany himself, holds a secret meeting with Hitler, proposing lifting the ban on the SA and the SS, dissolving the Reichstag, holding new elections, and dumping Chancellor Brüning if Hitler would support his government. He agreed. But Chancellor Brüning was forced to resign, effectively ending democracy in Germany. And as a result of all that, this is what happened. June 14th, 1932, the Papin lifts ban on SS and SA, and we had Bloody Sunday, enjoyed particularly by a growing, being taken very seriously now by neither his friends nor his enemies. He was reputed to be superficial, ambiguous, vain, crafty, and as an intriguer. This is what they were talking about. Okay. In an effort to support the Nazis, to win Nazi support, they reiterated Schleicher's previous underhanded offer to Hitler. It was basically by a political agreement. Hitler agreed, Papin fell into the trap, and the Reichstag was dissolved on June 4th, and new elections were called for in 1932. On June 14th, lifted the ban, and Germany was now effectively almost in the hands of Adolf Hitler. Okay. Chancellorship, vice chancellorship, 3 cabinet posts for the Nazis, creation of the propaganda ministry, this was very important, took over control of the interior, control of Prussia, and passage of an enabling act giving him control to rule by decree. At this point, class, Hitler was pretty much unstoppable at this point. It was only a matter of time because his party was growing exponentially each and every day. Okay, I'm through talking right now. Does anybody have anything to ask or comment on what we've learned? Again, I went through this pretty quickly tonight. There was a lot to get to. So please feel free to ask any questions. I will turn it over to the Ivy administration and they will.
Leah has a question.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Why did Hitler hate the Jews and why didn't anyone stop him from killing all the Jews?
Okay, very good question. Okay, Hitler hated the Jews because Hitler at one point in his life was a very religious man. He was actually a devout Catholic at one point in his life. In fact, one of Hitler's most ardent goals as a child would to be eventually become a priest. But his demands and his life took a different turn. He wanted to be a painter and an architect. He didn't do well, but actually some of his artistic work was quite good. But he became a political strongman after his stint in the army and after he was basically shown what he could do if he wanted to rise to power. He had a very high gift of speaking, but because of his wanting to be a priest, if you go back to the Bible, one only has to read the Bible to realize that the Jewish people were the ones that persecuted and crucified Jesus Christ. That's why he hated the Jewish people, because of what they did from a religious standpoint to Jesus Christ. It's interestingly enough, and many people ask that, was that really the reason? And I've got some documents that confirm that he didn't like the Jews primarily because of that. And the fact is he felt the Jewish people were undermining Germans' wealth by taking everything from the German people. He did not like those people.
Thank you for answering my question.
Certainly. Well, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it. The next time we're going to get into something a little bit more fun. We're going to finish this Adolf Hitler's rise to power, and then we will get into the German miracle years of what Hitler would actually do for Germany in the first couple of years of his Nazi party. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it. Bye-bye.